In the United States, the right to vote is often spoken of as a sacred pillar of democracy, a fundamental promise that every citizen's voice matters. Yet beneath the surface of this cherished ideal, a quiet but relentless campaign is underway to make voting harder, not easier. This is not a single, visible attack, but a slow, methodical erosion of access, happening through a complex web of new laws, court decisions, and administrative actions. While many Americans go about their daily lives, the very foundation of their power to choose their leaders is being chipped away. Most people do not realize the scale of this threat, as these changes are often presented under the guise of election integrity or bureaucratic efficiency, masking their true impact. The current landscape of voting rights is profoundly shaped by a rollback of federal protections that once served as a critical guardrail against discrimination. The landmark 2013 Supreme Court decision in Shelby County v. Holder effectively dismantled key provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This ruling removed the requirement for states with a documented history of racial discrimination to get federal approval or pre-clearance before changing their election laws. The floodgates opened. In the years that followed, and accelerating after 2020, states across the country, no longer under federal oversight, began enacting a wave of restrictive voting measures that would have been blocked just a decade earlier, creating a patchwork of unequal access. This legislative push has been systematic and strategic. A close examination reveals a pattern. Since 2020, states like Georgia, Arizona, Texas, and Florida have passed dozens of restrictive laws. Research from Santa Clara University shows that these bills are overwhelmingly sponsored by white, male, Republican legislators. For instance, Georgia's SB 202 not only added strict ID requirements for mail-in ballots, but also drastically reduced the number of ballot drop boxes, and even made it a crime to offer water to voters waiting in long lines. These are not isolated incidents, but part of a coordinated, multi-state effort to reshape the electorate and determine whose vote is easily cast and whose is not. The federal government has recently amplified these state-level efforts. President Trump's executive order on election integrity, issued on March 25, 2025, represents a significant federal push to impose stricter rules nationwide. The order mandates that states require documentary proof of citizenship for voter registration, a high bar that many citizens cannot easily meet. It also directs federal agencies like the Department of Homeland Security to aggressively cross-reference state voter rolls with immigration databases, a practice that historically leads to flawed purges of eligible citizens. By revoking a prior executive order aimed at expanding voting access, the new policy signals a clear and decisive shift away from inclusion and toward restriction. One of the most effective tools for disenfranchisement is the voter purge, where election officials remove names from registration lists. While list maintenance is necessary, the methods used are often flawed and politically motivated. In Florida in 2000, a flawed purge wrongly removed thousands of eligible voters, 65% of whom were African American, by using a broad name-matching policy to find supposed felons. The 2025 executive order's mandate for aggressive voter roll maintenance using federal databases threatens to replicate these errors on a national scale, disproportionately flagging naturalized citizens and minority voters with common names, potentially disenfranchising them without their knowledge until they are turned away on Election Day. Strict voter ID laws have become another common barrier, often justified as a measure to prevent fraud, despite scant evidence of widespread impersonation. These laws require voters to present a specific type of government-issued photo ID, which a surprising number of Americans lack. Studies have consistently shown that Black and Hispanic voters are significantly less likely to possess the required identification compared to their white counterparts. For students, the elderly or low-income individuals, obtaining these documents can be a significant hurdle, involving costs, travel, and navigating bureaucracy. The Indiana Photo ID Law of 2006 became a model for other states, creating a system where the right to vote is contingent on possessing a specific form of identification that is not universally accessible. The challenges extend beyond individuals to entire communities, particularly indigenous populations living on tribal lands. These communities often face unique obstacles, such as non-traditional mailing addresses that are not accepted for voter registration, or a lack of accessible polling places. Closing polling locations, removing ballot drop boxes, and eliminating mobile voting units, actions taken in many states, have a magnified impact in rural and tribal areas where transportation is limited. These logistical hurdles are not accidental. They are the direct result of policy choices that make it physically harder for certain groups of people to participate in the democratic process, effectively silencing their collective voice on issues that directly affect their lives and sovereignty. Young voters, especially college students, are also a specific target of new restrictions. Many new laws make it more difficult for students to use their campus addresses for registration or require them to use IDs from their home state, which they may not have with them. Because students tend to vote at higher rates for progressive causes and Democratic candidates, these rules are often a thinly veiled attempt to suppress their political power. The combination of confusing residency rules, strict ID requirements, and a lack of accessible on-campus polling options creates a formidable set of obstacles designed to discourage participation from a generation that is politically active but often transient, making their engagement in local and national elections far more complicated than it needs to be. Beyond making it harder to cast a ballot, powerful actors are also manipulating the very structure of democracy to dilute the power of certain votes. The primary tool for this is gerrymandering, the practice of drawing legislative district boundaries to give one political party an unfair advantage. Using sophisticated data and mapping software, politicians can pack voters from the opposing party into a few districts or crack them across many districts to weaken their voting power. This means that in many states, politicians are effectively choosing their voters rather than the other way around. The result is a system where election outcomes are predetermined and representatives are not accountable to all their constituents. This silencing of political voice extends beyond the voting booth and into the realm of public protest and activism. A new and alarming trend is the rise of anti-boycott laws, which are increasingly being used to stifle dissent. These laws often require individuals or companies who contract with a state to sign a pledge that they will not boycott certain entities or countries. While initially focused on the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement related to Israel, the legal framework is now being expanded to protect other industries such as fossil fuels or firearms. These laws create a dangerous precedent, forcing citizens to trade their First Amendment right to free speech for the ability to earn a living. Compounding these issues is the spread of misinformation and the introduction of loyalty oaths, which are designed to control political discourse and enforce ideological conformity. Disinformation campaigns, often amplified on social media, flood the information ecosystem with false narratives about election fraud or political opponents, sowing confusion and distrust in democratic institutions. At the same time, some states and organizations are pushing for loyalty oaths for public employees, educators, or even candidates, demanding a pledge of allegiance not just to the country, but to specific political ideologies. These tactics aim to create a chilling effect, discouraging critical thinking and punishing those who do not adhere to the prescribed political line. The cumulative effect of gerrymandering, anti-boycott laws, and misinformation is the creation of a political landscape where the voices of the powerful are amplified and the voices of dissenters and marginalized groups are suppressed. When districts are drawn to be non-competitive, voters feel their participation is meaningless, leading to apathy and lower turnout. When activism is criminalized or contractually forbidden, a key avenue for social change is closed off. And when the public square is filled with lies, it becomes nearly impossible for citizens to make informed decisions. These are not separate issues, but interconnected strategies that work together to entrench the power of a select few. The convergence of these restrictive laws and systemic manipulations constitutes a multi-front crisis for American democracy. It is a slow-motion disenfranchisement that targets the most vulnerable and politically active segments of the population, minority communities, students, indigenous peoples, and activists. The problem is not merely that it is becoming harder to vote, it is that the very principle of fair representation is being deliberately undermined. A system where some votes are systematically devalued or obstructed cannot be called a healthy democracy. Public awareness is the first and most critical step in confronting this challenge, as these quiet changes thrive in the shadows, away from public scrutiny and debate. Fortunately, the fight to protect voting rights is gaining momentum. Advocacy groups like Defend the Vote are working tirelessly to counter these trends. On July 24, 2025, the organization announced its endorsement of U.S. Representative Haley Stevens for the Michigan Senate, highlighting her commitment to federal voting rights legislation. These groups are not just playing defense. They are building a proactive movement, launching multi-million-dollar campaigns to support pro-democracy candidates, fund legal challenges against restrictive laws, and conduct research to expose the impact of voter suppression tactics. Their work is a crucial bulwark against the erosion of democratic norms and a testament to the resilience of those fighting for a fairer system. Protecting the future of fair representation requires a two-pronged approach, restoring federal protections and supporting local election infrastructure. Passing legislation like the Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act would re-establish a federal baseline for voting access, preventing states from creating discriminatory barriers. At the same time, it is vital to increase funding for local election officials. These administrators are on the front lines, and they need resources to run safe, secure, and accessible elections, free from the intimidation and political pressure that has become increasingly common in recent years. Supporting these workers is essential to rebuilding trust in the electoral process from the ground up. Ultimately, the responsibility for safeguarding democracy rests with its citizens. It requires staying informed about legislative changes at both the state and federal levels. It means supporting organizations that are fighting in the courts and in Congress to protect the right to vote. It involves engaging in local elections, volunteering as a poll worker, and helping others in the community navigate the complexities of voter registration and ID laws. The threats are significant and systemic, but they are not insurmountable. By understanding the nature of the challenge and taking collective action, we can push back against the forces of suppression and reaffirm the promise of a government of, by, and for all the people.